Cade Povich certainly wasn't perfect in his major league debut on Thursday, but the young Orioles lefty did show some flashes of a guy who could help this team down the stretch. I'll recap Povich's first big league start in the Orioles' loss on Thursday, coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, June 7th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap the Orioles' 6-5 loss to the Toronto Blue Jays on Thursday afternoon as the O's ended up splitting this 4-game set north of the border. I'll get you the 5 things you need to know from that one, including another multi-home run game for Adley Rutschman, Ryan Mountcastle getting a little unlucky in his favorite place to hit, and the Orioles offense just kind of surprisingly not scoring some runs against a left-hander. Then we'll talk about really the biggest moment from Thursday, and that was the young left-hander Cade Povich making his major league debut for the Orioles. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. And I'll break down his first big league start, what we could see moving forward. And then finally, my latest edition of the Orioles Bullpen Trust Power Rankings to finish off the show. But that's all up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonmlb and use code all lowercase LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. So we start today with another Orioles loss. The O's, who won the first 2 games of this series pretty handily on Monday and Tuesday. They lose on the walk-off on Wednesday night. And then Thursday afternoon, it looked like it was going to be kind of a flat performance. Then the Orioles put together a comeback, 2 in the 8th, 2 in the 9th, but just came up short, losing to the Blue Jays 6-5 on Thursday. That means they split the 4-game series 2 apiece. It still does continue the stretch. 20 consecutive series for the Orioles against AL East opponents in which they haven't lost the series, 14 series wins and 6 series splits. In that stretch, the Orioles with the loss now 39-22 through 61 games this season. And as the Yankees, I believe, are waiting to play later here on Thursday as I record early Thursday evening, the Orioles sitting 4 games back of New York as they sit in second place in the AL East. But I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles 6-5 loss to the Blue Jays on Thursday. The first thing you need to know is, well, Cade Povich made his major league debut for the Orioles. We talked about it a lot on yesterday's episode. Make sure to go back and check that one out if you want kind of the full scouting report on Povich and how he's done so far this year in AAA and why he got the call to start on Thursday. But I thought he was solid in his big league debut, right? Like, not the greatest stat line that it ended with. It was 6 runs on 5 hits over 5 1/3 innings, 2 Ks, 4 walks, a homer, and 100 pitches. But he only allowed 2 hard hit balls. The stuff looked pretty good. The command kind of slipped away from him. He gave up a home run at the worst time. His bullpen didn't strand some runners for him as well. I thought overall it was solid, and there will be much more on Povich's start coming up in the second segment of today's show. But the second thing you need to know from the Orioles loss is that the Orioles struggled against a left-handed starter for really the first time in a while. The O's have been, this year, one of the best teams in baseball when facing left-handed pitching. They've been better against left-handed starters than they have against righties, which has been a nice turnaround from when the Orioles struggled at times against lefties in 2023. And they had a little bit of a struggle against lefties very early this year, but then turned it around and started to crush left-handers. The Orioles came in hitting .271 as a team with an .813 team OPS against left-handed pitching this year. But Yusei Kikuchi, who has had his struggles against the Orioles before, he just shut him down. 6 innings, a 1-run ball, 4 hits, 6 Ks, 1 walk. The only run was an Adley Rutschman solo homer in the 6th that got the Orioles on the board. O's only had 4 hard hit balls against Kikuchi in this one. And they just, I don't know, they didn't have it. They usually square up lefties well. Maybe some of it is because they didn't have Jorge Mateo in this lineup against the left-hander. That's where he really starts to get things going. They had the guys in there who generally hit lefties well, and the O's still did end up with 6 hits in this game, but it was mostly against the bullpen. I mean, the O's kind of got to this pen. We'll talk about what Adley did to the bullpen. They almost made the full comeback in this game. They went into the ninth trailing 6-3. Jimmy Garcia on the mound. He's been stellar for the Blue Jays this year. Hits Austin Hayes, and then Ryan O'Hearn hits a pinch hit 2-out, 2-run homer to make it a 6-5 game. Just crushes one, 104 off the bat, 405 feet. And I'm assuming the question comes up, why are you hitting Ryan O'Hearn there? Why wouldn't you hit him one spot back when he has a chance to tie the game? Well, you're down 3 runs. You have a runner on first with 2 outs. That guy, and it was O'Hearn, I believe, pinch hitting, for Connor Norby in that spot. That guy in that spot just has to get on base. You don't need a homer. You don't need an extra base hit. You just need to get the tying run to the plate. And your best left-handed bat on the bench in terms of getting on base over a sustained stretch is Ryan O'Hearn. Although he's a big power threat too, Brandon Hyde trusted him to get on base, and he did get on base. Now, he circled the bases, and then Hyde went with Kyle Stowers as the pinch hitter from McCann afterwards, because Stowers not as much of an on-base guy, but is a guy who could run into a home run for you to tie the game. Unfortunately, Stowers struck out on a nasty changeup, didn't tie the game, but it was the right sequence of pinch hitters, and it almost worked. And the O's, of course, they got 4 runs in the last 2 innings off the Blue Jay bullpen, but just did not do anything against Yusei Kikuchi. Now, those first 2 runs they got from the bullpen came off the bat of Adley Rutschman. And the third thing you need to know from the O's loss to the Jays on Thursday is that Adley, while the rest of some of his teammates were not, was certainly locked in during Thursday's game. Adley with a 2-homer performance in this one, 2 for 4 with a couple of long balls, 3 RBIs and a strikeout, hitting .307 now with an .835 OPS on the season. Got the Orioles scoring started, a hanging breaking ball from the right side of the plate against Yusei Kikuchi in the 6th. Hit it out to left field for a solo shot, 101 off the bat, 387 feet. And then he got the Orioles back in the game, facing Zach Pop, the former Oriole minor leaguer, with 2 outs and 1 on in the 8th inning. Just destroyed a ball to right field, hitting from the left side, 109.3 off the bat, 414 feet for a 2-run shot that all of a sudden made it 6-3 and made it a save situation. Second multi-home run game for Adley this season. Both of them have come against the Blue Jays. The other one was when he hit that game with 2 solo homers a couple of weeks ago when the Orioles lost in extra innings at Camden Yards to the Blue Jays. But we talk a lot about Ryan Mountcastle dominating the Jays, and we'll talk about Ryan in a little bit. But you look at Adley Rutschman's career numbers now against Toronto after the 2-homer game on Thursday. He's now played 36 games against the Blue Jays, and Rutschman is hitting .347 with a .424 on base, a .625 slugging. That is a .1049 OPS with 10 home runs in 36 games against the Blue Jays. Pretty much all of those stats across the board, while they are in about 20 less games, are better than the stats Ryan Mountcastle has against the Jays. So we can continue to talk about Mountcastle against the Jays, and Mountcastle specifically at Rogers Center is dominant. But Rutschman is actually better against Toronto. And it's nice that the O's have guys that just kill this Blue Jays team. And now Adley this year in 6 games against the Blue Jays, Rutschman is 10 for 23. That's a .435 batting average with 5 home runs in the 6 games, 9 RBIs, and a 1587 OPS against Toronto this year. I don't think the Blue Jays want to play this Orioles lineup a whole lot more this season. And speaking of Ryan Mountcastle, the fourth thing you need to know from Thursday's loss is that really besides Adley Rutschman, and of course, I mean, Ryan O'Hearn hit a screamer for that home run, but the only guy who consistently squared the ball up against both Kikuchi and the Blue Jays bullpen in this game was Ryan Mountcastle. Now, he was only rewarded with 1 hit. He went 1 for 4 with a first inning single, but all 4 balls that Mountcastle put in play were hard hit. The single in the first was 105 off the bat. He had a screaming out to right field later in the game. It was 110 off the bat, had a .510 expected batting average per StatCast. Then he hit a line drive out later in the game, 99 off the bat, .470 expected batting average. And then another liner in his final at bat in the 8th inning, 99 miles an hour off the bat again, and a .590 expected batting average. Like, Mountcastle had a day where he should have been 4 for 4. And honestly, if he gets hits in those other spots, this might be a completely different ball game. And it's funny to look at, just like even when Mountcastle doesn't have the greatest day in Toronto with a 1 for 4, he's still scorching the pitchers that he is facing. I mean, the Jays just probably continue to have nightmares about Ryan Mountcastle. And the fifth and final thing you need to know from the Orioles 6-5 loss to the Blue Jays in the series finale in Toronto on Thursday afternoon is that the bullpen was solid after Cade Povich came out of the game. Now, Dylan Tate was the first guy in there. came in first and second, one out in the sixth, with the Orioles at that point trailing 4-1. And Tate got a ground out, but then unfortunately did give up a 2-run single to Ernie Clement, let the inherited runner score and make it a 6-1 game. But he got out of the inning, and then the O's did go to Keegan Aiken, and it was another good bounce back outing for Keegan Aiken. He had those 2 bad relief appearances right at the end of May. But since then, he's been good, and Aiken kept the Blue Jays at 6. He threw a scoreless 7th and a scoreless 8th. You like to see the length from Keegan Aiken out of the bullpen. And when he came in, it was 6-1 in the bottom of the 7th. You're thinking this outing doesn't mean anything. But then all of a sudden, the Orioles scored 2 in the 8th and 2 in the 9th, and you're like, wow, it was actually huge that Aiken threw those 2 scoreless innings. He almost allowed the Orioles to come all the way back in this game, and it continues a trend for the O's bullpen. Of course, the 2 runs that Tate allowed on the single were not charged to him, so the Orioles bullpen technically goes 2 2/3 scoreless on Thursday. The Orioles bullpen now has gone in the last 8 games, allowing only 2 earned runs total in its last 8 games, and they've had to cover some innings in these last 8 games. The bullpen is kind of firing the best it has all year, and that especially bodes well when you're in this stretch of June where you only have the 1 off day. But alas, the Orioles did lose the game, and then some of the reason they did was because they called up Cade Povich to make his major league debut, and he certainly wasn't as sharp as he would like to be, charged with 6 earned runs in this game. But coming up next, I'm going to dive deep into Cade Povich's MLB debut, what looked good, what didn't, and what the future will be now for the 24-year-old left-hander. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Policygenius. A lot of life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. And Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family easy and quick. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. Now, if you have ever thought about getting life insurance, if you're in the process now, you know it can be stressful. And what's good about Policygenius is they make it so much easier on you. It could be a stressful topic to talk about, life insurance, but Policygenius helps you easily compare all of your options from America's top insurers. They have no incentive to recommend one over the other, so you can really trust their guidance, and they're there for you when you have questions, because it is a tough process to go through. So get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. So the Orioles did drop the game to the Blue Jays 6-5 on Thursday afternoon as they end up splitting this 4-game set north of the border. And all 6 runs in the loss were charged to Cade Povich, who made his major league debut for the O's on Thursday, called up to the taxi squad Wednesday, and then ends up making his major league debut. 24-year-old left-hander Orioles acquired in the Jorge Lopez trade from the Twins at the 2022 deadline, has been pitching extremely well as a starter in AAA Norfolk this year and earned this call-up. Now, the good news that we got from Brandon Hyde, even before Povich took the mound on Thursday, was he gave more clear reasoning for why Kyle Bradish didn't start this game. This was Bradish's scheduled start on Thursday, and the O's initially said, we're pushing him back. Hyde was asked if he'd pitch in Tampa. Hyde said, I don't know. But Brandon Hyde did give more clarifying info Thursday, which was good. He said the full reason for pushing Kyle Bradish back on Thursday was to just give him a couple of extra days of rest in this tough stretch. It had nothing to do with any injury concerns. And that was huge to hear from Brandon Hyde. So hopefully we see Bradish at some point pitching in this 4-game series in Tampa against the Rays. But for Cade Povich, it was both kind of a tough spot, because it's a divisional game. O's trying to win a series. He's facing a very right-handed lineup as a left-handed starter, but also good for him to get this call up here in early June. I thought overall he was solid. He was fine. I liked what I saw at times. Again, the final line, 5 1/3 innings, 6 runs, 5 hits, 2 Ks, 4 walks, a homer, and 100 pitches thrown. Let's start with only 2 hard hit balls allowed by Cade Povich. That is pretty impressive. When you go through 5 1/3 innings against a solid major league lineup with some really good right-handed hitters and only allow 2 hard hit balls, that's something to be up. The first hard hit he allowed was kind of the big swing of the game. 3-run homer hit by Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to the opposite field in the 4th inning that opened the scoring and gave the Jays a 3-0 lead. And then the only other one was later in the game. Vladdy hit a single off the wall in right field that was kind of scorched off Povich. Those were the only 2 hard hit balls. And I was pretty impressed by that. Like, he threw a lot of 4-seam fastballs, which you're generally going to expect from Cade Povich. He's thrown almost 50% 4-seamers in his time in AAA, and it's not crazy velocity. He averaged 92. He got up to 93 and 94 a few times, but it plays well up in the zone. It kind of gets on you. The velocity, if you hear hitters talk about it, it plays higher than 92. It plays like it's 96, 97 at times. And he got like a lot of foul balls on that pitch. He got a lot of lazy fly balls, especially early in the game. It was like lazy fly balls to right field a lot off that high fastball, which was, I thought, looking really good from Cade Povich. I mean, on the day, the average exit velocity by Blue Jays hitters against him was 76.5 miles an hour. That's pretty elite in terms of avoiding hard contact. Unfortunately, the first hard contact he allowed was the big blow, was a 3-run homer that kind of changed the game in the 4th inning. And that brings me to kind of the downside of Povich. The upside was, I thought he attacked early. I thought his stuff looked good. I thought he avoided hard contact. That is all good. The downside was he kind of stepped off the gas pedal in aggressiveness right around when he gave up that home run to Vladdy. Those first couple of innings, he rolled through without any hits, and he was just pounding the strike zone the first time through the Blue Jays order. But as soon as those Blue Jays hitters came up for the second time, Povich started to nitpick a little bit. He started to try to pitch off the corners. He was missing the strike zone more and more, and he just got passive in his pitching. He was trying to be a little too precise instead of what he did early, which was attack up in the zone with fastballs and get lazy fly balls. And guys like Vladimir Guerrero and others were able to jump on him and put together some more runs. And like, it was tough for the Guerrero situation because he had walked a couple of batters before that, and there were 2 on and 2 out. The 2 guys on were via the walk, and then he gives up the 3-run homer. If you give up a solo homer, that's going to happen in your major league debut. It's not going to hurt you. But if you walk guys before the middle of the lineup comes up, that is when you get into trouble. And that's exactly what happened for Povich. And I do think what he will learn is that, wow, I gave up 6 runs, but I probably pitched better than that, than giving up 6 earned runs. And it could have been 4 runs, right? If Dylan Tate gets out of that jam in the 6th, it's 4 earned runs instead of 6. And the line obviously looks a whole lot better if that becomes the case. But I just think what Povich will learn from this first start is that he needs to stay aggressive, even if he gives up a hit or 2, even if he gives up a home run. Once you get to that 2nd and 3rd time through the order, continue to stay aggressive with that fastball. That is his main weapon. Continue to go to it. Now, the other thing that was a little less than ideal, I mean, only 8 whiffs on 44 swings is not great. He did get 3 of them on the cutter, a couple on the fastball, a couple on the curveball, which I liked at times. I think the one thing that is the other issue is the Blue Jays, I mean, rightfully so, they put a lot of righties in there against the lefty Povich. 8 of the 9 players in the starting lineup for the Blue Jays were hitting from the right side of the plate against Povich. Dalton Varsho was the only lefty in there for Toronto. And generally for Povich, he kind of mixes the curveball, changeup, and cutter as his off-speed weapons against right-handers. But the pitch that really can throw them off balance, and not necessarily is like a huge strikeout pitch for him against righties, it can be, but is more of a get me out of a jam, get me a slow grounder, get me weak contact pitch, is that changeup. Now, he used it as his number 4 pitch, but when you look at the breakdown from Povich's 100 pitches, 48 fastballs, and then it was 17 cutters, 17 curveballs, 15 changeups, and 3 sweepers. So essentially the cutter curve change he used all the same, is kind of tied for his number 2 pitch. The 15 changeups, he did get 1 whiff, but he was barely in the strike zone with that pitch. And that's the part that's a little concerning. Only 4 of his 15 changeups were thrown within the strike zone. You have to be in the zone a little closer to 50% with that pitch to get right-handers to chase the pitch out of the zone down and away. What was happening was they just weren't chasing the changeup when it was out of the zone, and it didn't really become a weapon for him against all those righties. And that put him in a bad spot where, despite how good his fastball is, he had to end up throwing it more to right-handers. They sat on it. They sat on the cutter as well, which is what Vladdy did for the home run. And despite the fact they didn't hit him hard, they had a better look, and that allowed them to take some walks. And a lot of the walks that Povich had, I mean, it's not a great day. You don't want to go out there and in 5 1/3 innings walk 4 batters. But I think all 4 of those walks, like, it was close pitches. He had the 9-pitch walk where he battled and battled and battled and then just missed outside with a changeup. But that was the thing. Like, Justin Turner probably identified changeup and said he hasn't thrown this in the zone, and he took it 3-2 just off the corner for ball 4. And so if he can show that change in the zone a little bit more, he can keep the hitters on his toes. And these are all things that Povich is going to learn if he gets more and more big league starts. And I want to show you right here, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you can see right now Povich's pitch distribution. These are all 100 pitches he threw in Toronto on Thursday. As you can see, he was pretty good at keeping the four-seam fastball up in the zone. He missed pretty high with it sometimes, but that'll happen. But as you can see with the changeup, he just couldn't get it in the zone. The changeup is the green on your screen right there, and there's just so many non-competitive changeups, like well behind the zone, way too far out, or well below the zone, I should say, way too far outside for Blue Jays hitters to chase them. And sometimes you can get a chase on a changeup that's that far out of the zone, but you have to be willing to show that they're in the zone. And as you can see with the changeups, he barely did that at all. And then you look at the cutter, and the cutter command was kind of erratic. It was all over the place as well, which I think hurt him. There was too many curveballs up. That was the other thing that I noticed. He lost command of the curveball pretty early in this start. He was missing like badly up. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that one blue dot that is like way up and to the right. That was a first or second inning curveball that he just lost out of his hand. He threw a couple of those, which was a little bit concerning, but those are probably the nerves as well. And the other thing is, like, his sweeper is a pretty good weapon, especially against lefties, but he doesn't throw it against righties. He only faced one lefty. It gave him the chance to only throw 3 sweepers out of 100 pitches. So, like, you take out a weapon when it's that many righties too, and he will learn more and more how to pitch against big league hitters. And I think he'll certainly learn from this outing. And now it is good news, as I mentioned, that looks like Kyle Bradish, no injury, not going on the injured list, just needed a couple more days before his next start. It was a tough last start for Bradish as well. But there's still a chance the Orioles could go to a 6-man rotation for a little bit. Hyde has talked about it again and again, the possibility of doing it here in June with only the one off day. And if they do decide to go to the 6-man rotation, I think I'd be totally fine with just keeping Cade Povich as that 6th starter and giving him another start sometime next week. Now, it would be a tough team to face. Povich would most likely be lined up to face the Atlanta Braves next week in Baltimore if he did get another start. But I'd like to see him start at home, because a lefty facing, good righties with that wall in left field, you can pitch a little more aggressively as a left-hander in Baltimore. It's something that has helped John Means. It's something that has really helped Cole Irvin for the Orioles this season as well. So if it were up to me, as long as the bullpen felt good enough with, if you go to a 6-man rotation, you lose a reliever, you go to a 7-man bullpen. If they feel good about it, and Brandon Hyde wants to give his starters more days off, especially Bradish and others, I would give that 6th spot to Cade Povich right now. I'd at least like to see one more start in the big leagues. Now, it's totally plausible that the Orioles just send him right back down. Like, we wake up here on Friday, he's been optioned to AAA, and another reliever has come back up to join the bullpen. It's certainly possible, but I would like to see him. I think he did enough with the stuff that he threw and the soft contact he gave up to give him another chance. And even if he does get back down soon, I think what I learned from this first start is at some point in the second half, Povich has the stuff to be a regular part of this Orioles rotation and help this team get to the postseason and win in the postseason as well. But speaking of that Oriole bullpen, it's been pretty good recently, especially in this tough stretch without off days. They've been great. As I mentioned, only 2 earned runs allowed in the last 8 games for the Orioles pen. So before we go for the weekend, let's check back in on the Orioles bullpen. Another edition of the Orioles Bullpen Trust Power Rankings is coming up next to finish off the pod. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by PrizePicks. Now, we've got a lot going on in sports right now. It's not just Major League Baseball, but you got the NBA Finals, you got the Stanley Cup Finals, and PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. You can get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. You just add your favorite players to your lineup, whether it is baseball, basketball, or hockey, and PrizePicks gives you a number. They say more or less And then you can win up to 100 times your money with baseball only lineups on PrizePicks or with other sports as well. Here is how it works. Maybe you're looking at Aaron Judge and it says more or less than 0.5 home runs. Well, the way Aaron Judge is hitting right now, I'm probably taking more. All you got to do is say more or less. The picks take less than 60 seconds, and then you can win money. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB and get a first deposit match up to $100 at PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So we move on to finish today's episode and this week on the pod with another edition of the Orioles Bullpen Trust Power Rankings. I've done them a lot this season. The way they work is I take every current member of the Orioles bullpen at the moment of recording, and I put them into three categories. Either I trust them, I maybe trust them, or I don't trust them at the moment, and give you the reasons why. Now, we're in an interesting spot right here because with Cade Povich being called up to make this start on Thursday, as I predicted, Nick Vespi was optioned back down to AAA. So technically at the moment, the Orioles are one down and only have a 7-man bullpen. And I'm going to tell you right now, I've got 5 relievers in my trust category, and I considered putting 6 in there. That's how well the O's bullpen is pitching at the moment. My first guy in the trust category is Yennier Cano, a 2.57 ERA in 28 innings this year with about a league average strikeout rate of 22%, and the walk rate a little bit up at 10%. Now, why Cano is there? Well, his 67% ground ball rate leads Major League Baseball, 37% chase rate is top 10, and if you're getting a lot of chases out of the zone and you're getting a lot of ground balls, you're going to have continued success, even if the ball's getting hit a little hard off you, which it has for Cano recently. But what Cano did on Wednesday night, that 1-2-3 eighth inning to keep the game tied with 2 strikeouts, that was maybe his most dominant outing of the season. So he is certainly in the trust for me. Craig Kimbrell is also in trust. I know he gave up the run on Wednesday night for the walk-off win for the Blue Jays, but that was an unearned run, and he now has 0 earned runs allowed in his last 9 appearances and no hits in 8 of the last 9. He's got a 2.95 ERA in 21 and a third innings this year, 37% strikeout rate. Despite his age, 36, he's still top 10 in baseball in strikeout rate, 11% walk rate. It's a little high, but that's basically what Kimbrell is at the moment. I'm still trusting him, and he's kind of back in the 9th inning and is mostly working out still at this point. Danny Coulomb, of course, all season in the trust category. He remains there, a 2.63 ERA in 24 innings for the Orioles this year. 29% strikeout rate is very good. 3.5% walk rate is just elite. Like, you look at all the stat categories for left-handed relievers in the American League, Danny Coulomb is basically first or second in every one of those pitching categories for left-handed relievers in the American League. He's been great. He continues to be great. He gets lefties and righties out. He's the reliever that I like watching the most, and of course, he's in the trust category. Then there is Jacob Webb, who for a moment there had dropped down to maybe trust for me, but he is back. Jacob Webb with a 1.93 ERA, the lowest ERA in the Oriole bullpen, over 28 innings of work this year, which also leads the Orioles pen. 22% strikeout rate is average. His 12% walk rate is a little concerning, but he's usually able to work around those walks. 32% hard hit rate against Webb is one of the lowest in Major League Baseball. And in his last 6 outings out of the Oriole bullpen, he has provided length and has not given up runs. Last 6 outings for Webb, 7 2/3 innings scoreless, 4 hits, 4 Ks, and 1 walk. Liking what I'm seeing from him. And then the last guy in the trust category, I wavered. There were 2 guys right on the trust bubble for me. I put 1 in trust, 1 in maybe trust. The one I put in trust is Cionel Perez. Now, he's given up a run in, like 2 of his last 5 outings right now. And he still only pitched 14 2/3 innings this year with a 4.3 ERA because of the injury. Strikeout rate's solid, walk rate's okay. But in his last 5 outings, 6 strikeouts to no walks. And if Cionel Perez is not walking guys, he becomes much, much better. That slider is looking better than it ever has. I think Perez is going to get better and better as this season goes on. So those are my 5 guys in the trust category: Cano, Kimbrell, Coulomb, Webb, and Perez. I've got the other 2 Orioles relievers in maybe trust. My first in maybe trust is Dylan Tate, and I was so close to putting Dylan Tate in trust as well. He had been for a while nails since the Orioles called him back up to return to the bullpen. But the last 2 outings made me drop him down. He's got a 2.79 ERA in 19 and a third innings. 14% strikeout rate is a little weird, but 8% walk rate is solid. He is still not allowed a hit on his sweeper this year, which is pretty impressive. His fastball velocity is back up to the old Dylan Tate, which is great. But the last two outings haven't been very good. He pitched really his first high leverage outing of the season back on Sunday against the Rays, and he gave up 2 runs, which gave up the lead. And then what he did on Thursday wasn't as bad, but he did allow 2 inherited runners to score, which kind of put the game out of reach. 1 or 2 more good outings, he goes back to trust, but right now he's in maybe trust. And the final guy in maybe trust is Keegan Aiken. 3.99 ERA in 29 of the third innings, 27% strikeout rate, 9% walk rate. He would have been in don't trust because he had those 3 disastrous outings at the end of May. But recently he's turned it back around. Last 3 outings for Keegan Aiken, 4 scoreless innings, 3 hits, 4 Ks, 1 walk. Again, a couple more good outings. He's back into trust, but he sits in maybe trust right now. And if Nick Vespi hadn't been sent back down to AAA on Thursday, he also would have been in maybe trust for me. He's only pitched 2 outings. We haven't seen a lot of him at the big league level this year. The thing to note is that is the 3rd time the Orioles have optioned Nick Vespi to AAA this year. The maximum is 5, which is good to note. If you try to do it more than 5 times in 1 year, the player has to go on waivers. So that's something to watch. He was optioned in spring training once. That does not count. He was also optioned once after being called up to be the 27th man of a doubleheader against the Cardinals. That also does not count towards the maximum 5. So he is at 3 right now in June. Just something to think about if maybe the next time the O's need a reliever, they don't go to Vespi. And also remember, unless there's an injury, he now has to sit in AAA for another 15 days before he can return to Baltimore. But that'll do it for today's episode and for the week on the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Orioles just rolling right along with another 4-game series against a divisional opponent this week and playing the Tampa Bay Rays again. They just played in Baltimore, took 2 out of 3 from Tampa last weekend. Now they have a weird wraparound series. It's a 4-game series starting on a Friday, which means they play Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. It starts with a Friday at 6:50. Aaron Savali for the Rays. Orioles are TBD. Could be Kyle Bradish. Saturday, the Orioles are TBD. Taj Bradley for the Rays at 4:10. And Sunday at 1:40, it is Zach Littell and TBD for the Orioles. Those 3 starters for the Rays, same 3 starters the Rays sent out there last weekend in the series against the O's. And the O's hit pretty well against, fairly well, I would say, against all 3 guys. You would have to think Kyle Bradish will pitch in one of these games. We know Cole Irvin will start in one of these games for the Orioles as well. Most likely, we see Corbin Burns on Sunday, maybe Grayson Rodriguez. We'll see how Brandon Hyde, how much time he wants to give Kyle Bradish to rest. But of course, I will be back on Monday to recap the first 3 games of the series, but the series will not be over. But before I go, do want to one more time remind you about the giveaway we're doing on the podcast here to celebrate reaching over 7,000 subscribers on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. And celebrate it, we are giving away the great t-shirt designed by my guy Chris Rulli. It is being sold over at route1apparel.com. It's got the outlines of the 3 grade 8s in the area, Lamar Jackson, Alex Ovechkin, and Cal Ripken Jr. on the back. If you don't win the shirt, or the hoodie, I should say, that's okay. You can buy one at route1apparel.com. But to win this, now this is the t-shirt, but we're giving away the hoodie version, which to me is even better. You got to do 2 things. 1, subscribe to the Locked On Orioles podcast on YouTube if you haven't already. And 2, leave a comment on today's video or any video this week. Just give me your honest feedback of what you think of the podcast, what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see in the future. I just want to hear from you to make this show better. And if you subscribe, if you comment and do it by midnight tonight on Friday, you will be entered. I will draw over the weekend. And I've been saying I'm going to do the drawing on Monday. I'm most likely actually going to do the drawing on Tuesday because Monday episodes are packed. You got to recap the whole weekend. So check out Tuesday's episode where I will announce the winner of the Great Eights hoodie. But again, I will be back Monday to recap the first 3 games of this weird wraparound weekend series between the Orioles and the Rays. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.